So what comes to mind when you think about archaeology? Egypt? Pyramids? Maybe even mummies? But archaeology is so much more, and it's right here in your own backyard. My name is Jeremy, and in this episode of Discovery for Abraham Lincoln, we're going to take a look at the archaeology of the state park. So, what is archaeology? Well, it derives from two Greek roots. The first is logos, which essentially means the study of something. So if you think about some of the other fields that end in ology, such as biology or geology or even entomology, it's essentially the scientific study of something. The other Greek root is archai. It's the same root that's used in the word archaic, and it essentially means something old. So quite literally, archaeology is a study of something old. No, we don't study dinosaurs. That's a common misconception. We leave that dinosaur stuff to the paleontologists. Instead, archaeologists like myself study past human societies. So you might be asking yourself then, how are we different from historians? Yes, it is true that historians also study past human societies, but historians focus their studies on written documents. It is a study known as historiography. Archaeological studies differ from historiography in a couple of ways. Archaeologists focus their studies on the material remains from past cultures, like the ones you see here in the case from Iceland Village. So rather than looking at written texts, archaeologists study the artifacts they left behind. This is what archaeologists refer to as the archaeological record. Another difference is that historians often focus their studies on specific people, whereas archaeologists study past cultures more broadly. Rarely are we able to study the history of a specific person. Most artifacts are mainly anonymous. It's unknown who left them behind. And that's even true for sites associated with a well-known person, such as the Custer House here behind me, here at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park. So you might be asking yourself that if historians already study the past, then why should we do archaeology? Well, there are a number of ways that archaeology contributes to our knowledge of the past. First, archaeologists often study cultures that didn't leave behind written records. With no written texts, these cultures would be completely unknown to historians. Archaeologists refer to these cultures as prehistoric, pre-contact, or pre-Columbian cultures. However, archaeologists also study historic archaeology. This is the archaeology of cultures that left behind written texts. So with historic sites, the archaeological record is used to complement the historic record, which consists of the written text. Sure, archaeologists use written text to help support our research, but we tend to focus on different types of research questions that are difficult to answer by looking at the written text alone. Questions such as identity, ethnicity, or even status or living conditions are often difficult to discern from the written record. There are a couple of reasons why these topics are difficult to study in written texts. First, people historically, as even now, tended to write about things that were important to them, and often didn't write about the topics of interest to anthropologists. Second, historically, not everybody was able to write down their thoughts. This may be because they didn't have the means to purchase paper or journals, or pens or ink to write things down, or they just may not have been available to them. Or they may have been unable to read and write. This limits the material from which the historian is able to draw to study the past. These texts are full of biases and written from a person's own point of view. The archaeological record, or the artifacts they left behind, are unbiased. Yes, we may be less likely to find the fine china because historically greater care may have been taken of those items to prevent them from breaking. But overall, the archaeological record doesn't discriminate, and it isn't full of the biases that you may find in the historic record. At Honest Land Village are the artifacts left from the daily lives of the Mandan people that lived here between the 15th through 18th centuries and are waiting to be discovered. At the Cavalry Post are the artifacts related to the 7th Cavalry when they were stationed here between 1873 through the 1890s. Although the occupants of Honest Land Village and the Cavalry Post never came into direct contact with one another, they both equally left a rich history that represented their lives while they lived on the land that is now part of Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park. Coming up in the series, we will take a look at some of the artifacts left behind by the Mandan people and the 7th Cavalry. We will explore how archaeologists use artifacts to study the history and culture of the park, and we will uncover what the artifacts tell us about the lives of the people that once lived at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park.